Thank you everyone for coming along today, and thank you for the organisers for inviting me. I've an article about what I'm going to talk about today published on farmonline.com.au, so you'll be able to refer to that afterwards if you get out of the session and say, what did he say again? And a reminder, the poll is open, so you can start polling the answers now before the questions come up. So I want to build on some of the key points raised by the first three speakers this morning. Miliana stated we need to better understand how consumers relate to new technologies. John showed us some developments in GM technologies and non-GM technologies. And Alison talked about the divisiveness of GMOs in agriculture. So I want to look a bit more at that poster child of technological divisiveness, which is GM technologies. What do you know about what the public think and why? So first, our poll. The first question I want you to look at is, science and technology creates more problems than they solve. Do you disagree strongly, disagree a little bit, agree a little bit, or agree strongly? Please vote. This is good practice for the election in a couple of weeks. So. If only you could vote on your phone at home for that one without getting out of bed. How are we looking? Okay, overwhelming disagree. Okay, thank you. Next question. People shouldn't tamper with nature. Disagree strongly, disagree, agree, or agree strongly? And it shows people, again, disagree overwhelmingly. Now, I'll show you in a minute what the Australian public think on those 2 points, and I'll show you why it's very salient that we understand where you sit compared to them. All right. I'm going to show you 2 key slides only, all the reams of data about public attitudes to GM, but only 2 I think we need to concentrate this morning. The first one is confidence in food and influence of GM on food consumption. And this is asked across a 10-fold scale, because people aren't for or against, they're for, a little bit in the middle, a little bit in the middle, against. So we've asked across a scale of 10, and I've broadband them into 3, 3, and 3, with the don't knows down the end. So you'll see we look at this scale here. Go back one, I want the pointer. That's a third of the population, third of the population, third of the population. Now, what we do know is that the relative understanding of attitudes to GM is very, very important to understand and almost never looked at. So we know that people's attitudes towards GM sits really between foods containing preservatives and foods with pesticides in them. People's attitudes to GM sits between those 2 attitudes. Now, this is really important because we've never had a chance to test run attitudes to GM in supermarkets on a broad scale. And this is the only slide I've seen, the only study I've seen that actually looks at, well, okay, we know that people have a preference for pesticides and chemicals in their food, but a behaviour that's different to their preference. So a lot of people say, no, I'd rather not have pesticides in my food and I'd rather not have chemicals in my food, but their buying behaviours can be a bit different to that, so preference behaviour different. This is the closest we get to being able to get a barometer for what attitudes to GM would therefore reflect most probably in behaviours. And behaviours would indicate it's, again, most likely to lie somewhere between those 2. Okay. Attitudes to GMO foods lie somewhere between attitudes of food grown with pesticides and foods containing preservatives. Key lesson number 1. Now, I could do this all day long. I've got graphs and slides and slides and graphs and graphs and slides. We could sit here until dinner time showing you all these graphs. But I'm going to cut through all that and come right to the chase. As Dennis pointed out, it's not so much what the public think, a lot of data about that, but why the public think it. Not so much good data about that. Okay, I said I'm going to show you 2 very important slides. This is the second important one. When you graph people's attitudes to GMOs across a 10-fold scale, it looks something like this. And we call these people the polar bears, because they're the polar opposites. And we call these people the penguins in the middle. Now, public debate is largely driven by these people and these people. And this, it's roughly 12 to 15% of the population, appears to be rusted on static. It doesn't move. These figures have all moved in the past 5 or 6 years. This group does not. And this group does not. Now, when you're having a public debate or a discussion or a policy impact, whatever, very important to know, are you talking to a polar bear or are you talking to a penguin? Because the polar bears tend to be noisy and representative, and the penguins tend to be quiet. And so very important that media coverage tends to come from here and here, not here. Blog posts come from here and here. Letters to MPs come from here and here. So very important to understand that. Are the people who are representing to you representing the broad population or representing the whole bears? Okay. Next one. We can overlay that with the broad groups of attitudes to GM. And there are 4 basic groups by attitudes. Those who say, never safe. I would never ever eat GM, it's never going to be safe. That's said between 12 and 15% of the population, as we see there. The second group, well, not until it's proven safe. And that's proven to me, not proven to the broad community, proven to me individually. The other one, yeah, but only if it's regulated, 26%. And the other one is a safe way to produce food. And again, I showed out these groups tend to be about the same size. So this is where the debate really needs to happen. Now, the fact that we have regulation and the fact that we have studies that prove safety is not enough. And we know that. Because based on a simple understanding, we say, well, we just have to show that we've got a regulator. We just have to hold up the latest studies, like the recent one from the American National Academy of Science, Engineering and Medicines analysed over 1,000 studies of impacts of GMO since the 1980s. They found not only was it not likely to be harmful, but it was likely to be beneficial. So surely that's going to make a difference. It doesn't. And I'll have to now show you why it doesn't make a difference. So people working in information programs for the past 10 years have been saying, why isn't this making an impact? It should be. Let's talk about why. We can also break up people, not just by their attitude, which is commonly done, but by their values, why they think what they do. Very important to understand a bit of values. So one slide giving a bit of background on values. When faced with an issue, next one. When faced with an issue relating to science and technology, we tend to adopt an initial position of support or opposition based on a variety of mental shortcuts or predisposed beliefs or values, rather than our scientific evidence. And examples are climate change denial aligns very strongly with the values of anthropocentrism. Anti-GM foods aligns very strongly with natural values, and anti-embryonic stem cells align with the right to life values. As has been said by many studies, we react to things emotionally before we respond to them cognitively. And that's a reason why somebody who has strong pro-environment values can say, respect the science on climate change. Yeah, but the science on GMOs is pretty wonky. And someone with pro-development values can say, respect the science on GMOs. Yeah, but the science on climate change is a bit wonky. It's the values that drive these seemingly conflicting positions. Okay, so over the past couple of years, when I've been working at CSIRO and did a study for OGTR in the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, we did a lot of values studies. And I'll just show you these very briefly. I'm only going to show you one set of them we did, but it's useful in itself. Again, they're divided into thirds, so the blue represents 1/3 the population, then 1/3, 1/3. Top third, middle third, middle third. Sorry, I should say that again. So if you're in the 10 out of 7, that's the top third by responses. So you've got 68% of the population in the 10 to 7 rating category. Okay? So the first one was commercial use of GM and its products should only be allowed after regulatory approval. You see about 70% of the population think, yeah, that's pretty solid. The next one, children must be protected from all risks. And you see about 60% of the population think that's very true, but significantly about 35 or so don't agree with that. And that's an important indicator, that one. Not vaccinating children puts others at risk. Only 5% disagree with that. Most people agree with that. People should not tamper with nature. If you remember, I asked that one of the audience earlier. And on this study across the broad population, we got 40%, 30% and 20%. That's a breakdown. Scientific advances tend to benefit the rich more than they benefit the poor. 35% of the population agree, 19% disagree. We depend too much on science and not enough on faith. 24% agree and 43% disagree. Science and technology create more problems than it solves. Another question I asked you, it's about even Stephen here across all three groups. And yet the group here was strongly in the disagree category. So well, no surprise really when you look at who's sitting around the tables. Technological change happens too fast for me to keep up with. 42% highly agree, down to 21% disagree. Now, we did lots and lots of these questions and we map out these cluster data analysis and we find are there commonality groupings. And we found there are 4 key profiles by values. And they are. The concerned. They have very low awareness of new technologies, high concerns, very conservative by nature, and the value statement that most described them was the pace of technological change is too fast for me to keep up with. Second group are the risk averse. They had fairly high awareness of science and technology, what it was and what it entailed, but very high risk concerns. And the value statement that most captured their thinking was science and technology can be dangerous and risky. Segment 3, the cautiously keen. They believe that the benefits of science outweighs the risks, but the overwhelming value that rides them on is children should be protected from all risks. And the final group, the science fans, mostly male, high support for all S&T, and the value that most summarised them was everyone should all take an interest in science, the passionate. Now have a think about yourself, which one of those 4 categories you're most closely aligned with, and have a think about your family and friends, where they all sit. Because very important to know that in Australia, as you move up the technological ladder, the cluster of segment 4s increases enormously. And as you move down the technology access ladder, the clusters of segment 1s increase enormously. And why that's important, I'll show you. Okay, so we look at those 1, 2, 3, 4 spreads across several different value statements. New technologies excite me more than they concern me. There's the spread, 1 and 3, 4. Science and technology create more problems than they solve, 1, 2, 3, 4, wider spread. People should not tamper with nature, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 and 3 very close together on this one. Technological change happens too fast for me to keep up with, and the bottom one's a bit out of alignment. We depend too much on science and not enough on faith. Now, why I asked you earlier to vote on these is because I want to show you something perhaps a little bit frightening to a group like this, who was largely in the 4 camp. Segment 4, those most in favour of science and technology, are outliers. Segment 4 people, if you're segment 4 in the room, you are further away from galactic centre point of the community than any other segment. Therefore, your capacity to understand what the community are thinking is greatly limited, and their capacity to understand you is greatly limited. And more of a problem when you're working only with other segment 4s, if you don't have representations from 3, 2 and 1. So a lot of people come to me, why do the public think this? How can they possibly think this about GM, biotechnology, synthetic biology, etc.? It's often because there's a bit of groupthink happening. So, key learning. Science fans are outliers, more further from the average than any other group. Doesn't mean there's no benefit in being a scientific fan, but you need to understand where you sit in relation to the community centre point. So, key learnings. Summing up. When information is complex, so if you want to take pictures of any slides, these are the last 2 ones that capture it all. When information is complex, people make decisions based on their values and their beliefs before they analyse them. Beliefs and values are the first point of making a decision. People then seek affirmation of those attitudes or beliefs, no matter how fringe, and will reject any information or facts that are counter to their attitudes or their beliefs. And we've seen that when people go shopping for the information, 1 in 100 supports their point of view. Here it is, the Ballard study, because that supports their values, ignoring the other 999. Attitudes that were not formed by logic are not influenced by logic. An important one to understand again when debating. Public concerns about contentious science or technologies are almost never about the science, and scientific information therefore does little to influence those concerns. And people most trust those whose values mirror their own. All right, and the final slide. What does this all mean? Many people assume positions about technology in the food chain based on their values and then go looking for confirmation information. You must address these values of concerns as well as the attitudes of concerns. People are receptive to messages that align with their values. If you can identify their values and frame a message to align with those values, you have a much higher chance of being accepted. Politically and policy-wise, we often use media outrage as a barometer for public attitudes, but we should determine if that is actually reflecting public attitudes, not activist or media attention of the polar bears. And all the things I've shown you today, that's some of it's fairly new research, what we found in Australia, we've been doing research here for quite a few years, If you ask me what's the comparable data in India and China and Indonesia, I'd have to say not very much. So it's a lot more work needs to be done in those countries to get that deep understanding of what's happening there. And that's it, and I think questions we're taking now or at the end in the panel.